Today's episode is sponsored by Surfshark. Go to surfshark.deals/Dominic Noble and use the code Dominic Noble to get 83% off a 2-year plan and 1 extra month free. More on this and the many useful reasons for a VPN coming later. Hello my beautiful watchers, and welcome back to my half-baked attempts to summarize the works of Anne Rice in preparation for comparing them to the film that was made of them in 2002. This episode concerns Book 3, The Queen of the Damned. If you missed my thoughts on Book 2, The Vampire Lestat, and the film adaptation of Book 1, Interview with the Vampire, I have created a convenient playlist for your viewing pleasure. Vampire fans were not forced to wait as long between books this time, as this installment was published 3 years after its predecessor in 1988. I think we covered most of the preliminary and background information in the last episode, so let's just jump straight in. As mentioned last time, Lestat's fate had been left in something of a cliffhanging state, but I hope you're the patient sort because this book withholds the thrilling conclusion to his tale until at least halfway through. Just like the Vampire Lestat before it, this book's timeline starts before the end of the preceding book, then eventually overtakes and continues the story. It also stays true to the Vampire Lestat's format of dedicating entire chapters to the origin stories of the new characters that are introduced, further stalling the main plot. And now a quick word of warning. There is a violent act of sexual assault described in this book that is relevant enough to the plot that I am going to have to mention it in the synopsis. Please keep this in mind that this is a traumatic trigger for you, and as usual, if you are offended by trigger warnings, you are cordially invited to go and stick your objection up your posterior where it belongs. The novel starts with a prologue by Lestat who explains that, obviously, he survived what's about to happen in this book because he's now writing it. He then goes on to explain that there were so many important players in this next part of his tale, he's had to make the sequel a collection of accounts instead of remaining the sole narrator. Truth be told, the last book was kind of a shared affair too, as several vampires got to tell their tales within the tale, but now it's official. He's kind enough to forewarn us that most of these people will be salivating over him throughout, but assures us he's definitely not making it all up, as he's extracted the truth from their minds using his vampire powers to make sure he got an accurate story. Actually, this isn't entirely true. The prologue is not technically the start of the book. It really begins with one of several poems by Stan Rice, Anne's husband. She somewhat jarringly includes her husband's entirely not about vampires work at the start of each section of the book. Anyways, after Lestat's foreword, Marius takes over the narrative to recap exactly what happened to him that led to his SOS call. He had, at some point in the 200-odd years since he parted ways with Lestat, moved the statues of Enkil and Akasha to an undisclosed location covered in snow and ice, and built a mighty modern structure there to house them. He's taken a short vacation to the US and visited a bar that's a low-key vampire hangout where he sees that some of his younger brethren have graffitied an intense call to action against Lestat for betraying the vampire's unspoken code of secrecy. It's interesting to note that despite Lestat being convinced that Marius would be so angry at him for writing about him and all of his secrets in his book, he would probably try to kill him, it turns out the old vampire was at most mildly amused by it, referring to Lestat as the brat prince and thinking of his actions as the cute behavior of an attention-seeking child. Marius, as I briefly mentioned in the last review, is not only one of the oldest vampires in circulation, he was also a lot older and maturer in human terms when he was turned, so he's one of the more emotionally stable and chill vampires. Returning to his Fortress of Solitude, he's shocked to discover that Akasha has been snapped out of her eternal petrification by Lestat's rock music that had been playing out of the TV he had set up for the king and queen before he left, and she had immediately killed Enkil and drained his blood. She collapses the structure on top of Marius, leaving him frozen and terribly wounded underneath the ice and snow. This was undoubtedly the first hint that he got that she wasn't the wise and beneficent ruler he'd been told she was. We then hear about an old archaeologist who is having mysterious dreams about ancient red-headed twins. He asks his daughter to contact an old mysterious benefactor of his because he is freaking out over how important he thinks this is. However, he dies of old age overnight, leaving his surviving daughter sad and confused. We then hear the story of the life and last hours of baby Jenks, a 14-year-old girl who was recently made into a vampire to save her life after a botched back-alley abortion. She's a member of a motorcycle gang of relatively young vampires and a big fan of Lestat's. She hopes to attend his concert, but she starts finding evidence that all of her vampire friends are spontaneously bursting into flames for no apparent reason. She has also been having dreams about the red-headed twins. Eventually she crosses paths with Laurent, who was one of the very few vampires who lived in the theatre in Paris to survive Louis' vengeance. They are just about to travel together when they too burst into flames. Despite how much this sucks, baby Jinx's mind is filled with happy thoughts of her mother as she dies. We then change to the perspective of Marius' ex-wife Pandora, who was his first vampire fledgling about 1500 years before he turned Armand. Pandora has heard that Marius has sent out an urgent psychic message, but can't hear it herself as it's revealed you can't telepathically connect with the vampire who made you. She goes to question a vampire called Azim about it, a very very old bloodsucker who lives in a remote mountain temple full of worshippers who think he's a god. And truth be told, his religion doesn't actually seem too bad. Everyone just constantly parties like it's 1999 BC. Pandora asks him if he's worried about Lestat telling the world about the king and queen in his songs, but he doesn't seem all that interested as he's far too busy having his blood orgies. They've both been dreaming about the red-haired twins, but he doesn't really care about them either, again too busy with his orgies, but eventually he is convinced to give her some hints about Marius' plight. The next POV character is Christian Slater, the boy. The boy. The young reporter who fatefully interviewed the vampire and wrote a book about it. Turns out that his name is Daniel, and he's not had a great decade since we last checked in on him. He never did find Lestat like he intended at the end of the first book, but he did eventually run into Armand, who was hanging around New Orleans waiting for Lestat to wake up. They end up in an unfortunately twisted relationship. Armand makes Daniel teach him the ways of the modern world, but refuses to turn him into a vampire, though he does drink from his blood all the time until the poor lad becomes addicted to the sensation. Daniel devolves into a drunken wreck and keeps trying to leave Armand, but ends up coming back to him over and over again in the way of many an abusive relationship. I did mention Armand is the worst in these books. Daniel eventually helps him buy an island just off the coast of Miami, where the boy vampire establishes what will become a little vampire community later. Right before Lestat's concert, which Armand intends to attend because he's still obsessed with Senpai, Daniel is in such bad shape he's straight up dying from his terrible lifestyle, prompting Armand to finally turn him into a creature of the night. Unfortunately, this only saves his body. His mind remains somewhat unhinged indefinitely. After that unpleasantness, we witness an ancient vampire waking up after being asleep underground for thousands of years. He doesn't have a lot of memories about who he is, but he does have a lot of fun integrating with modern society and meeting people. He's also confused about all the vampires being exploded around the world until one day he witnesses the culprit in the act, a vampire whom he recognizes and who recognizes him, and this triggers all of his memories to come flooding back. The vampire is Kaiman, an ancient Egyptian and Akasha's former servant, and the vampire before him is Akasha herself. She tries to use her powers to incinerate him too, but they discover he's old enough and strong enough to be immune to her. Kaiman decides that he has to warn the rest of the vampire world about her and attend Lestat's concert. We're then introduced to Jessie Reeves, who I think is the clearest example of one of the issues I have with this book, because she has this incredibly long, incredibly rich, and incredibly complex backstory, followed by an interesting personal journey throughout the book, all of which ultimately has, at best, a minuscule impact on the main plot. Orphaned at birth, she was claimed by a mysterious Aunt Maharet, who, you can tell from the story, is clearly a vampire, who arranges for her to live with some rich human relatives. As she grows up, she discovers that she can see ghosts and is understandably deeply freaked out by this until the spirit of her mother shows up to explain that they really can't hurt her, she just has a rare magical ability to perceive them. Yeah, a ghost helps a child be less scared of ghosts. Not so original after all, M. Night Shyamalan. She's in regular contact with the mysterious Aunt Maharet via letters, and she assures her that the ghosts are indeed real but harmless, and that her kind of magical powers are rare but not unheard of in the great family that she belongs to. She eventually meets Maharet in person and a few of her associates, again all clearly vampires though she doesn't know this just yet, and is taken to an old vampire stronghold that contains records of the great family she is a part of. She sees a family tree covering 3 entire walls of a massive room that shows that she is a part of a world-spanning network of descendants of a lineage that started thousands of years ago. However, one of Maharet's vampire friends, Mael, who it turns out is the ancient Gaul who had helped kidnap Marius at the behest of a vampire who wanted to turn him to investigate the calamity all those thousands of years ago. Don't worry about them meeting later, they get on just fine. Older vampires never hold grudges. Anyway, he eventually tries kissing her, which I think was clearly an attempt to turn her, but it was stopped by Maharet punting him out of the window. Maharet decides it was a mistake letting Jessie get so close to the darker elements of her life, so uses her vampire powers to erase her memory as much as possible, leaving her only confused fragments and writing her a letter saying she's going to keep her distance from her from now on for her own safety. Word of Jessie's ability to see ghosty goos eventually makes its way to an ancient secret organization of humans who monitor and study the paranormal called the Talimaska. They send one of their senior members, David Talbot, to offer her a job studying and occasionally exercising these spirits, but surprisingly haven't caught on that she has vampire relatives. Maharet isn't overjoyed at the idea of Jessie becoming a part of this group, but trusts her not to give away the secrets she does remember about the great family. She notices that Mael was mentioned in the book during Marius' section, and finally realizes what he and Maharet are. She becomes obsessed with confirming this, so retraces Louis and Lestat's lives from their books, and eventually decides to defy orders and go and see Lestat at his concert. Incidentally, she's also having dreams about the red-haired twins. The main plot finally gets going when most of the characters mentioned thus far who didn't die or are trapped in ice all attend Lestat's concert. All the more powerful are drawn to each other, ignoring the angry fledglings who are there to pick a fight with Lestat for going public, and they compare notes on the bad news coming. Jessie takes an opportunity to jump on stage and embrace Lestat, feeling his inhuman body and confirming her suspicions about vampires to be true. Unfortunately, after security drags her off him, she goes to collect herself and is recognized as a member of the Talimasker by one of the aggressive younger vampires, who picks her up by the neck and hurls her against the wall so hard it breaks her neck. She is rushed to hospital but deemed beyond help. At the last minute, Maharet turns up to turn her into a vampire to save her. Between Jessie, Gabrielle, Nikki, Baby Jenks, and arguably Claudia, this does appear to have become one of the most common reasons for new vampires to be made. Back at the concert, Armand and Daniel try to reach Lestat as he's being attacked by the angry vampires, but witness all of his young assailants combusting. And finally, we return to the Brat Prince himself and pick up where the Vampire Lestat book left off. Lestat wakes up with Akasha, who seems to have become infatuated with him because it was his music that woke her up, and also because he's drop dead gorgeous. She lets him drink her blood, which I remind you is a pretty sensual thing between vampires, and it gives him a massive boost to his undead powers, unlocking the ability to fly and use telekinesis. I do like that it's not entirely lost on Lestat how incredibly weird it is that he's getting off with a queen and the demigod of his race. Meanwhile, Pandora successfully rescues Marius from the ice pit he was left in, and they fly together to meet up with Mael before proceeding to Maharet's stronghold. Everyone immediately recognizes Maharet as one of the two redhead twins from the dreams they've been sharing, revealing that she is as ancient as Kaiman and Akasha. Marius is a tad miffed that she left him to be babysitter for the king and queen for thousands of years without telling him how much they actually sucked, but they agree they do have bigger stuff to worry about, and Maharet calls a general, "Oh man, we are all so buggered" meeting. This reunites Marius with his beloved fledgling Armand, who's there with Daniel. Gabrielle and Louis also arrive, along with a really old vampire called Eric, who seems to only be there to be a whiny bugger, to be honest. Maharet tells them that the vampires in this room are the only ones left in the entire world besides a few that might have been super well hidden or powerful enough to be able to resist Akasha's power. The queen has burned everyone else, hundreds, maybe thousands of vampires killed overnight. It dawns on them that most of the survivors are only still here because they're important to Lestat in some way, and Akasha doesn't want to upset her new boy toy. They try to make some plans to save themselves and rescue Lestat, but Maharet tells them that if they kill Akasha, they will all die as well, as she holds within her the dark spirit that perpetuates their unlives. This partially explains the vampire calamity mentioned in Book 2. They ask where the other red-headed twin is and if she's the reason they've all been sharing dreams about them. As is now standard for this series, Maharet proceeds to recount her entire life story. This is where we discover just how wrong Marius' understanding of vampire history was. Back in ancient Egypt days, when Akasha and Enkel were the human king and queen of the land, Maharet and Makare were witches who had the power to talk with and summon invisible spirits that were apparently pretty common. She goes on to share a lot of historical information about the setting and the society she grew up in, and the politics of Akasha's rule after she and her husband took over. Akasha had heard about the witch's power and invited them to visit her, but they had sent some evil omens around her and refused to go. It's around now that a particularly evil spirit named Mel comes to try to tempt them into some bad things, but they are not interested in its antics and send it away. Later, as they're attending their mother's funeral, Enkel has his soldiers slaughter everyone in their village. He does this under the pretense that they broke his laws about not doing any more naughty barbaric customs like ritualistically eating their dearly departed's heart and brain. You know, I might have discouraged that sort of behaviour too, if I'm completely honest. It sounds unhealthy. Of course, his real reason was to have an excuse to drag the twins to his palace and use their witchy wisdom for his and Akasha's own ends. At this point in time, Kaiman was the chief of the guard and in charge of imprisoning them, though he at least attempted to be kind to them while following orders. Akasha interrogates them endlessly about these spirits and wants to try to control their power. To teach her a bit of a lesson, Makare summons Amel, but only to scare her. The king and queen want to sentence the twins to death, but they're now too scared to, so they order Kaiman to rape them in front of everyone instead, intent to humiliate them and prove their dominance before sending them back home. Amel, the dark spirit who's still hanging around, insists on trying to get revenge, though the twins retain enough clarity to beg him not to. Maharet soon discovers she's pregnant and has a baby. One day, a few years later, Kaiman comes back to get them again because Amel has attacked and possessed the king and queen, and they're needed to come fix the situation. This is why you probably shouldn't horribly mistreat your country's only Ghostbusters. Just saying. During all this, Lestat has taken all over the world with Akasha as she shares her new plan for world domination with him, which is pretty genocidal, but Lestat is currently too infatuated and drunk on power to really object. They arrive at Azim's temple, and Akasha kills him for pretending to be a god, something only she's allowed to do, and forces Lestat to use his new powers to slaughter all of his male worshippers. Lestat is so horrified that he's killed so many people, and worse because this is the first time he's ever killed when it wasn't strictly necessary for feeding purposes, it snaps him out of his trance and he starts trying to talk talk Akasha out of her plans, which she does not appreciate. The story then returns to Jessie, who has woken up and realized that she is now a vampire. Obviously there's a lot of adjustment and deep thought, just like with all the other characters. Then she catches up on what's been happening via human news reports of everyone exploding everywhere, and eventually joins the rest of the vampires sitting around the table to listen to Maharit's story continue. It turns out that after the twins got sent home, Emil started haunting Kaiman's house like a poltergeist, and the king and queen went in to face him to try to learn about his powers, but they got assassinated by people who wanted to overthrow the kingdom at the exact same time. Emil, who had always had a bit of a fetish for blood, went into Akasha's wounds and possessed her, bonding with her brain and heart. This is how she became the first vampire. She then turned Enkel, and they started a bloodthirsty rule while working through a pretty understandable freakout about their new vampire natures. Maharit pauses in her story to tell everyone that she just felt Akasha getting closer and Lestat telepathically calling, but can't quite hear what he's trying to say.
I said I'm stopping by Starbucks on the way to the coven. Does anybody want anything?
Returning to ancient Egypt, Maharit and Makari arrive back at the palace to get caught up on the tomfoolery that the king and queen have been getting up to with the stabbings and the blood drinking and whatnot. Akasha and Enkel clearly want the witches to tell them they've been turned into gods now, but the witch twins instead go with the hard truth that they have been turned into abominations that will inevitably conceive a whole subspecies of little abomination children and be generally evil and nasty forever. The queen actually takes it surprisingly well. Just kidding, she loses her gosh damn mind and has Maharit's eyes plucked out and Makari's tongue cut off and throws them both in jail to await execution. However, it's here that they make their fatal mistake, because they turn Kaiman into a vampire and he decides that he is sick of their shenanigans, so sneaks into the prison to vampire up the twins and help them escape. They travelled around for a while making more vampires to try to fight a rebellion against the king and queen, but eventually they got attacked by a big mob who managed to capture the twins and take them back to the nasty royals. Akasha has them put in coffins, attaches the coffins to rafts, and shoves each of them in opposite directions on completely different oceans. Maharit ended up in Africa and rejoined civilization, engaging in the rather unfortunate necessity of ripping the eyes out of her human victims to place in her sockets, which works because vampire healing. This could only be a temporary solution though, because the mortal eyes eventually rotted away, so she would have to keep finding fresh ones. Poor Makari floated across the entire Pacific Ocean and ended up in a part of South America that wouldn't become populated for another few centuries and goes utterly mad from all the isolation. Despite near constant searching for millennia, Maharit was never able to find her sister. Kaiman's rebellion against the king and queen eventually succeeded though, and turned the vicious buggers into stone statues. A few thousand years later, Maharit found out that the royals were still around, at least in some form, and were being looked after by an oblivious Marius, so snuck into his house to get revenge. However, just in time, she sensed that killing them would doom all of the other vampires to the same fate, so aborted the plan. Maharit still feels a sense of victory over Akasha though, and not just because she's a lawn ornament now, she has something that almost no other vampire has: a legacy. Her daughter had grown up to spawn a great house of descendants that Maharit had carefully followed throughout the millennia and occasionally helped out in the form of a generous aunt, e.g. all the things that she had done for Jessie over the years. Keeping track of her great family had kept her sane when so many other ancient vampires like Magnus had gone mad and ended it all over the millennia. She then drops the bombshell that she can finally sense Makari again and knows that she's coming to duke it out with Akasha. Her sister might just be old enough, strong enough, and crazy enough to kill the queen. However, if she does so, then they're all going to die too, so they're kind of in a lose-lose situation. After she finishes her story, she takes all of the vampires to look at her unbelievably massive family tree. The sheer scale of her descendants blows all of the vampires' minds, and they unanimously agree that even if they all die fighting Akasha, saving the great family of humans is more important. However, plan A is to try to reason with her, so hopefully it won't come to that. Apparently, for the thousands of years that she was a statue, she's been able to see the world through the eyes of various other people she's linked up with, and witnessed all of the horrors humanity had been getting up to. She had concluded that humankind needed to be brought under super strict control, namely hers. As the vast majority of world leaders had always been men, she decided that the best way to keep them in line was to kill all but 1 in 100 males in the world. All the vampires around the table object to this for obvious moral reasons, and even Lestat speaks up in dissonance. Angered by this, Akasha looks like she's about to kill everyone there, but, well... Okay, I swear that I am not exaggerating how abruptly this is all resolved. Makari suddenly arrives, kills Akasha without much difficulty, then eats her heart and brain in a ritual similar to the ancient Egyptian custom that Enkel once outlawed, absorbing Amel's spirit into herself and becoming the new Queen of the Damned, turning her to stone but keeping the other vampires alive. The survivors all go to live on Armand Island for a bit to try to figure out what to do now that they are a super endangered species. Lestat is a tad bummed out about the whole thing, taking some time out to write his second book comprising of everyone everyone's recent experiences. The other vampires tell him that he's not allowed to publish it, but they don't really expect him to start obeying the rules now because, you know, he's still a stat. He suspects it will be treated as a work of fiction though, as after he dropped out of the public eye the same day that a whole bunch of people mysteriously combusted and his car was found wrecked, the world now assumes that he's dead and that he had disappointingly been just an attention-seeking musician with a vampire-themed gimmick after all. Eventually, Louis sneaks off to go and visit New Orleans, and Lestat goes running after him, and they both end up at their old flat where they once lived with Claudia. Lestat suddenly starts to feel adventurous again, so he talks Louis into going on an impromptu date with him and starts flying him around the country.
I can show you the world, shining, shimmering, splendid. Tell me, Louis, now when did you last let your heart decide?
They visit David Talbot and inform him of Jesse's new blood drinker status. Then, just for funsies, Lestat starts fucking with his head by half offering him immortality and insisting on leaving him his phone number as an eternal temptation. Louis is furious at him for being such a carefree jerk, which reminds Lestat of how much he loves being a carefree jerk, and that is the fairly happy note that the book ends on. It kind of boggles the mind to really think for a second about what actual progression we got regarding the plot that was set up in the Vampire Lestat. Lestat wakes up, hangs out with Akasha for like 2 nights, they gatecrash a meeting of all these surviving vampires, then an uber-powerful nemesis Deus Ex Machinas away into the room and tears Akasha's head off. Lestat is kind of messed up about it for a bit, then remembers he doesn't give a damn about anything and goes back to being a lovable douchebag and waltzes off into the night with his hot boyfriend. The origin story of vampires and Akasha was definitely a logical inclusion, but the rest of this 448-page book is made up of detailed accounts of the lives and unlives of a dozen characters who are, in my opinion, significantly less interesting than Lestat. Some of the characters are so tenuously connected to the main plot, this book almost feels like an anthology. For the 3rd novel running, Rice has taken some sort of hard right turn in the way that she writes, and it's just a little bit jarring, though admittedly this might have been exacerbated a little bit for me by me reading these books back to back. With the simultaneous revelation that witches, demon spirits, ghosty goos, and human clairvoyance exist in this world, this book partakes in a trend which I've noticed is pretty common in stories concerning vampires, in that it may start with vampires being the only supernatural thing in the world, but very quickly expands into other magical creatures until it fully embraces the fantasy kitchen sink trope. So there's this character I didn't mention in the synopsis called Santino, who tags along with Pandora to rescue Marius because she needs someone who can hear his mind voice, and Marius doesn't really react to seeing him, which is really weird because a few hundred years before, Santino had set Marius on fire, killed all of his adopted children, and taken his favourite, Armand, away to be tortured and indoctrinated into his satanic cult. This is apparently semi-retconned in later books where he does get mad at him, but for now, I mean, I know I mentioned elder vampires aren't in the habit of holding grudges, but this seems a little ridiculous. Between this, Marius also having no beef with Mayel for kidnapping him, or Lestat for giving away all of his deepest secrets, Louis dating Armand even after he admitted to manipulating Claudia's murder and influencing him into turning Magdalene, Lestat not even mentioning that Louis had set him on fire the last time they had met, or Armand chopping his first boyfriend's hands off and helping him kill himself, or Armand pushing him out of a tower. I just don't really get Rice's vampires sometimes. They either possess an inhuman capacity to forgive, a depressingly extraordinary level of apathy, or they're just really badly written when it comes to consistency and motivation, and I genuinely can't figure out which one it is. That said, I am 90% sure that the moving part near the end, where all of the vampires decide that finally dying for realsies is an acceptable price to pay to save the rest of the world and the Great Family, was an intentionally nuanced and well-written part of the story, showing that Rice's vampires are many complicated things, but they are not inherently evil or selfish. It also amused me what a difference there was between the young and the old vampires' reactions to the Talimascar, with the modern fledglings attacking members on sight in a murderous rage, and the ancient ones finding the idea of a group of humans trying to document their secrets flattering and adorable. Okay, I think that I put off watching the film for long enough. Do join me next time, my beautiful watchers, for Queen of the Damned, Lost in Adaptation. In the meantime, I suspect that this might be a good moment to mention that, while the sudden return of ancient progenitor vampires is not actually a legitimate threat, online data security issues like tracking and theft of passwords and other information are very real and increasingly worrisome. It's more essential than ever to use a VPN to protect yourself when you use the internet. I used to just use one when I was connecting to unsecured public Wi-Fi, but with more people working remotely at the moment, home networks are now in the crosshairs, so I basically use one all the time now, and my go-to is Surfshark. Beyond just security, there is a massive additional benefit to VPNs, and I cannot overstate how much I love this, they allow you to circumvent the unforgivably frustrating licensing rules that dictate which countries you're allowed to watch what programs in. Just for example, when Disney Plus decided to launch in my home country of the United Kingdom months after it came out in the US, and then still had the sheer gall to release shows like The Mandalorian one episode at a time after the Americans had already flooded social media with every plot twist and thousands upon thousands of memes of Baby Yoda. With Surfshark, my countrymen could have raised a big middle finger to such unfair treatment, binged the entire series, and then joined in on the fun of trying to figure out how the child is so frickin' perfect. Flipping it around, due to yet more geo-blocking dumbassery, shows like Star Trek Discovery are not available on US Netflix, but they are in the United Kingdom, and Surfshark could get you immediate access to it. There's examples like this all over the world, and it doesn't have to be a thing anymore. Then of course there's the before mentioned essential security. VPNs redirect your internet traffic through a specifically configured remote server, hiding your IP address and encrypting all of the data you send and receive, making it impossible for any shady companies to log it and sell it to the highest bidder. Surfshark even takes things one step further and includes an easy-to-use feature that multi-hops your connection through multiple countries, adding an additional level of protection. Surfshark is already one of the more affordable VPNs, and for a limited time you can get 83% off a 2-year plan and an additional month for free at surfshark.deals/DominicNoble. This special offer means that for just $1.91 per month you can browse securely on all of your devices. We all have a lot to deal with at the moment, but having our information collected or straight up stolen online doesn't have to be one of them. So please go to surfshark.deals/DominicNoble or follow the link in the video description and take advantage of this offer using the code DominicNoble. Thank you for joining me, my beautiful watchers. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to help shield the channel from the all-powerful algorithm by feeding it those sweet, sweet likes, comments, and shares. If you're new here and would like to stick around to see how this whole vampire saga ends, give that subscribe button the old clickaroo. Have a most pleasant day, and I will see you soon.
I can open your eyes, yes I can.
Much love and appreciation to my patrons of honor, Shelby Holtz and Sam Cucinotta.
And under on a magic carpet ride, a whole new world, a new fantastic point of view. No one to tell us no, or where to go, or say no, don't eat my blood, please.
Hello again, my beautiful watchers. I just wanted to take this opportunity to give you a quick reminder that there's a wonderful website called Patreon that's been allowing online producers to actually make a living doing what they do, since apparently YouTube's decided that they shouldn't anymore. Basically, they offer the chance to pledge a certain amount of money per month or per video in exchange for various rewards offered by the creator. There's a variety of stuff you can earn by becoming one of my patrons, including early access to all videos and taking part in that survey you see at the start of every Lost in Adaptation episode. That's actually a very important part of the process, as I use it to gauge how much I'm going to need to explain about the book and the film before I start comparing them. If you decide to become a higher level contributor, your name will be added to the credits that you're seeing right now, and you'll be given the option to join my private chat room so you can regularly talk with me and other patrons. If you're keen enough to join the topmost tier of patronage, you'll earn the most coveted of all the rewards, the chance to pick a future adaptation to be reviewed by yours truly. However, if right now you are thinking, my goodness the Dom, I can't do that, I was going to. I found a magic lamp that granted me 3 wishes, and I meant to wish for infinite wealth, but, well, long story short, I have 3 jetpacks now. Fear not, it would still be a huge help to me if you were to give that like button the old clickaroo, share this episode on social media with perhaps a little recommendation to your friends to check it out, and subscribe if you've not already. It really helps my channel grow and reach new beautiful watchers. I hope you have a most pleasant day, and I will see you in the next episode. Sorry if I'm a little croaky in this one, my voice is just a nightmare at the moment. Ugh, stupid ulcers on the vocal cord. Did you just sneeze on my foot? You little bugger. Come here, baby boy. Yeah. You can't really see him. There he is. You my little void. Void, void, void. An annoyed void. In my description for what was going on in ancient Egypt, I just realised that I've been going back and forth between present and past tense. And I'm not sure I have the energy in me to go back and re-record it, so if anyone noticed that, well, they were watching the episode, kudos. It was a dumb mistake. Queen of the Land, Maharet and Macadamia Nuts, how the fuck do you say her name? Amel, who had always had a bit of a fit. So Terry, is this the exact moment that you have to try and eviscerate my curtains? It is? Okay. My mistake. Are you on the catnip again? I thought you went to rehab. The sheer scale of her descendants blows all of the vampires' minds, and they unanimously, I'm having a bit of trouble with that word, and they unanimously almost made it for unanimously, but fell down on agree. And they unanimously agree that even I'm making it a little bit further into the sentence each time, but I'm still only halfway through. And even Lespat. Oh, it is me, Lespat.